Welcome to KCS at Home Summer Edition. I'm so excited that you have joined me today to do some reading, talking, and writing. If this is difficult to understand, feel free to turn on the closed captions, adjust the speed of the video, pause and watch again, or pause and discuss with someone in your home. For the next several videos, we will be learning about adventures by land, air, and water. We are looking to build knowledge and understanding of the word adventure. I see three word parts: ad, then, venture. Ad means toward, then means to come, and ture makes it the action of. So when I think of adventure, it's the action of coming towards something. I wanted to look at the definition of adventure to make sure I have a deep understanding, since we are anchoring all of our learning around this. The definition: an unusual and exciting, typically hazardous experience or activity. Now that I have a good understanding of adventure, I see we will be looking at adventures that might happen by land, air, and water. Our essential question that will guide us during our learning is, what makes an adventure? Let's look at some morphology to help us gain a deeper understanding of our text. I love how morphology helps me understand the more academic words in complex texts. First, let's look at the word hazardous. This word comes from our definition of adventure. First, I see the suffix "ous", leaving us with the base word of hazard. "Ous" typically makes the word an adjective meaning full of, and the word hazard means danger. So if something is hazardous, it is full of hazards or dangers. The next word I would like us to look at is this one. That's a pretty big word. To help me read this, I need to find any prefixes or suffixes on this word. First, I see the prefix non. Then I found the suffix able. This leaves us with our base word, perish. I know the prefix non means not, and the suffix able means able to. So this word, non-perishable, must mean not able to perish. As we read today, we will gain an even deeper understanding of this word. The last word I want us to look at is the word survive. This word has the prefix "sur", then it has a root "vive". The prefix "sur" means beyond, and "vive" means to live. So to survive something means you will live beyond what is expected. That kind of makes me think back to that first word, hazardous. Well, let's do some knowledge building around our question, what makes an adventure? I bet you know of several adventures already. What are some adventures you have read about? Well, I'm excited to share some examples of adventures you may have read throughout the year in 4th grade. During Unit 1, we read about several different adventures. Our first one was about a dog going on an adventure with his master. That's right, Lewis and Clark and me. I loved hearing about their adventures throughout the Louisiana Purchase through Seaman's perspective. We also read about a family who lived out west in the 1860s. That's right, Laura and her family on the banks of Plum Creek. This helped us understand the pioneer or adventurous spirit of those who moved west after Lewis and Clark explored the Louisiana Purchase. Next, we read a trickster tale, The Horned Toad Prince. I loved how Reba Jo learned her lesson, a deal's a deal, through her adventure with the horned toad. In Unit 2, we got to focus on an adventure with horses. That's right, horse heroes. We read about the brave young men who relayed the mail across the country before we had the communication technology of today. In Unit 3, we joined Warren Fadley in Eye of the Storm as he chased Hurricane Andrew. That definitely takes an adventurous spirit. In Unit 4, we saw the Navajo code talkers create a secret code to help win World War II. Without their adventure, who knows what could have happened? And finally, in Seeker of Knowledge, we joined Jean-Francois in his lifelong adventure to discover how to read and understand the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. Wow, now that we've reviewed what an adventure may look like, let's look at our learning target for today's lesson. We want to explain why it is important to be prepared for an emergency. Think back to our definition of the word adventure. Sometimes they are hazardous and often dangerous. Emergencies are both of those things. As we are reading today, be sure to keep this in mind. Now, to be successful by the end of this lesson, we are going to make sure to gather the appropriate information to meet this target. So here's the success criteria for the lesson. We want to include evidence about how to be prepared. We will gather this through annotating the text as we read. We want to include elaboration on why that is important. Be sure you are verbalizing your answers as we work together. This will help you be able to explain your answer at the end of the lesson. We want to include topic-specific vocabulary. We're going to be on the lookout for those words that we could use in our answer and in our writing. And then finally, we want to include a variety of sentences with correct punctuation and capitalization. It is always important to use grammar and writing knowledge to produce the best writing we can. So as we're reading today, this text is called, Are You Prepared for an Emergency? Based on this title and text features, what would the genre be? If you said expository text, you are right. This text gives real information that we could act upon during an emergency. Notice how the author includes real pictures or photographs. I noticed the house with the fallen tree, the house with a flood, water and canned goods, and the picture of the flashlight, batteries, a radio, and a whistle. I wonder how all these things will relate to being prepared for an emergency. And just as a reminder, if you have a copy of the text, feel free to annotate with me as we gather our evidence. Now, I'm going to remind us each time we read about our learning target. This will help us be able to explain this by the end of the lesson. So, explain why it's important to be prepared for an emergency. Let's read the first paragraph together. It is important to be prepared for emergencies. You never know when they may strike. In school, you prepare for emergencies by practicing drills in case of a fire, tornado, or hurricane. However, do you practice being ready for emergencies at home? Why should we prepare? Right. We never know when they may strike. What is they referring to? Right, the emergencies. Well, and we have a subordinating conjunction in this sentence, the word when. It starts the dependent clause, when they may strike. This cannot stand alone. You must put it with the independent clause, You never know. This complex sentence helps me understand that these emergencies are unpredictable. How do we prepare for emergencies at school? Right. We practice drills. Here we mostly do fire and tornado drills. If we lived on a coast, we would practice the hurricane drills, but we don't have to practice those since we are inland. Now, does your family have an emergency plan? If so, that's great news. If not, maybe you can use the information in this passage to help your family create an emergency plan. Let's look at paragraph 2. Remember, our purpose for reading is to explain why it is important to be prepared for an emergency. We already have an idea that we need to practice because they're unpredictable, but let's continue gathering evidence. Go ahead and read paragraph 2 on your own. What is one of the most important ways to be prepared? That's right, we need an emergency kit. Why would this be important? That's right, it supplies you with everything you may need during an emergency. Where should the kit be kept? Good, a place that is easy to remember and find. Why should we prepare for an emergency? Remember, we will be writing in response to this question at the end of the lesson. Be sure you are keeping this clearly in your mind. Now we're moving on to our third paragraph. Remember, we want to explain why it's important to be prepared for an emergency. Go ahead and read this next paragraph. Good job. What should our emergency kit include? Right, basic supplies to help your family. There's that word, survive. Survive is what we mentioned in our morphology lesson. Sur means beyond, and vive means to live. So we need an emergency kit to help us live beyond this disaster or emergency. Right after the word survive, we see the word if. This is a subordinating conjunction that helps me understand there are conditions when the emergency kit would be most useful. So, when would the kit be most useful? That's right, when there's no electricity or water, when we're unable to leave for up to 72 hours. Why would we need supplies for 72 hours? Right. It can take days for workers to reach you. You may be stranded or alone, and you could have to survive for several days without outside help. Man, based on this paragraph, why should we prepare for emergencies? Right. We need our emergency kits to help us survive. There may be a time where we must wait for help to reach us, so we must be prepared. I hope you're using that topic-specific vocabulary like the word survive. So remember, we're continuing to answer the question, why is it important to be prepared for an emergency? Go ahead and read the next paragraph. What is one of the most important supplies? Right, water. How much water should you have in your emergency kit? Right, 1 gallon per person for at least 3 days. Wow, that's a lot of water. I can infer that water is essential for survival. What else do we need? Right, 3 days worth of food. The text explains the food must be non perishable. What does that mean? Good, food that cannot spoil or go bad. The author gave us the definition by using a comma in the word or. We could say either non perishable or food that cannot spoil, and it would mean the same thing. What types of food are non perishable? That's right, granola bars, canned tuna, dried fruits, and peanut butter. So, based on this paragraph, why must we prepare for emergencies? Good. We need to have certain supplies to survive, like water and non perishable foods. Again, I really hope you're using those text specific words like non perishable. Let's continue with our purpose to explain why it is important to be prepared for an emergency as we read the next paragraph. Go ahead. What are some other necessities needed in our emergency kit? The first one I see is a radio that's powered by batteries. Why? Right. There may not be electricity during the emergency, and we have to know what's happening because our normal way of media, like watching the news, will not be available if there's not electricity. And you've got to know what's happening during an emergency. What else do we need? Right, extra batteries. That's always important. What else? Ooh, a flashlight. Why would we need a flashlight? Right, there could be no electricity during the emergency, and we've got to be able to see. What else? Oh, a whistle. Why would we need a whistle? Right, to signal for help. What's another thing we might need? Oh, an emergency kit, or excuse me, a first aid kit. Well, how would we need that? I hope you thought back to the previous page. What if someone was hurt and the rescue workers couldn't get there right away? The first aid kit could help save a life. So, based on this paragraph, why is it important to be prepared for an emergency? Maybe you said something along the lines of the electricity could go out and you would need to be able to have your essentials like flashlights and a first aid kit to know what's happening and be able to survive. Now let's go on to the next paragraph. Remember, why is it important to be prepared for an emergency? Go ahead and read. All right. Is creating an emergency kit good enough? Well, you have to check it every 6 months. That's really important to check our emergency kit. You want to replace items so you have fresh food and water in your kit. So let's read our final paragraph here, continuing to think and explain why it is important to be prepared for an emergency. Go ahead and read. What must we remember? That's right, to remain calm. The text also says this word, reassuring. What does that mean? Reassuring means removing doubts and fears. So what was reassuring in the text? That's right, knowing you've planned ahead and prepared. Wow. Our job today, we wanted to be able to explain why it's important to be prepared for an emergency. Remember, think back to our definition of adventure. Adventures are hazardous and often dangerous. Emergencies, like we learned about today, are definitely considered an adventure. We wanted to show we were successful by including evidence about how to be prepared. Those were those annotations we have on the text. We wanted to include elaboration on why this is important. We explain that after almost every paragraph. We wanted to include topic-specific vocabulary. Think back to those words like non-perishable and survive. Those were very topic-specific vocabulary words. And then finally, we want to include a variety of sentences with correct punctuation and capitalization. We always want to use our best grammar and writing knowledge to produce the best writing we can. And a variety of sentences would be compound, complex, and simple sentences. When we use these, it makes our writing more interesting. So our writing task is explain why it is important to be prepared for an emergency. Be sure to include evidence from the text. Now, if you would like to see an example of this quick write, after you complete yours, feel free to visit the KCS at Home resource page. If you would like some additional activities to complete along with this text, you may do so. Some ideas are listed below. Create an emergency plan for your family. List the supplies needed for an emergency. Be sure to include the amounts of each of the items you would need. And then finally, you may research the Red Cross to see how they help during emergencies. So to recap today's lesson, we looked at what makes an adventure. We reviewed some of the stories that we read throughout the year, and we added to our understanding of an adventure with how to prepare for an emergency. We explained why it is important to be prepared for an emergency as we read and as we talked about the text. We talked about how to be prepared. We explained why we needed to be prepared. We talked about topic-specific vocabulary during the morphology lesson and as we read. You had the opportunity to write in response to the text. And hopefully you feel maybe more prepared for an emergency. If you would like an example of the quick write, make sure to visit the KCS at Home resource page. And then finally, there were a few extension activities that you could do if you would like to continue working with this text. Just review the previous slide for the additional extension activities. Thank you so much for joining me today as we did KCS at Home Summer Edition for the Elementary Reading Department. My name is Madison Snyder, and I work at Bonnie Kate Elementary. Thank you so much for joining.